Welcome to the Pulse of Jonesboro. I'm Jeremy Terrell. This is episode number 3, and you can get us anywhere that you get your podcast. I first want to start by a shout out to all of the men and women in uniform. This last week, we had some storms come through, and some of you may know, but I do a little bit of storm chasing. When it gets close to Jonesboro in Northeast Arkansas, I'm usually out trying to help with the process, make sure that people are safe. We got eyes on the storms and know exactly where they are going. I was one of the first on the scene in Lake City when the tornado came through, and the men and women in uniform that serve us, both police and fire department, we're all there and we're willing and able and helping. I had the opportunity to spend a little bit of time with the Craighead County Police Department. We got there and this house was completely demolished. All the walls were like laying in on themselves, and a lady had waved us over and her dad was in there, and we were able to peel back all the walls and find this man unscratched and laying in this little area where he could only be laying, because the rest of the house would have been on top of him. It was a pretty amazing experience. But the wind was blowing and the rain was coming down, and everybody just didn't hesitate. They just jumped out there and started pulling pieces off, and we could hear a little bit of him, saying he was there and alive, and we got him all out, and it was a great experience. We went to a couple other houses. We had some people that where the roof was gone, but they're in their safe home, but you couldn't get out, and so we had the opportunity to get those people out as well, and a couple others. We just did some searching, but the men and women in uniform really stepped up and did a ton. They were worked through the night, going door to make sure that everybody in that area was safe. Give a shout out to them, shake their hands, tell them well done, because they did a great job the other night. And I'm glad everybody is safe and that we didn't have any deaths from that. And just continue to pray for those that are dealing with this damage and the floods. And it was a pretty rough week as far as the weather goes last week, but our thoughts and prayers go out to those that were affected by it. So I've gotten some great feedback from some of the first episodes that we've done. And in those episodes, we talked a little bit about schools and in our city and the importance of schools in our city. Last week, we talked a little bit about the makeup and the dynamics of Jonesboro. And I had some feedback talking about, or actually asking questions, what do our elected officials do exactly? And I thought that was a great question. And sometimes we don't really know what they're doing or what their purposes are or their roles are. And truth be told, I don't know if all of them know what their purposes or roles are either. We're going to take a couple of weeks and we're going to talk about those. Today we're going to talk about school boards, the roles of the school board members and what they do versus like the superintendent. And I think that'll give people around Jonesboro and surrounding areas in Craighead, will give them a little bit of a better idea of what the people in their schools do that are in charge, and maybe help us to hold them a little bit more accountable, because again, they are accountable to us. But school board, they are elected officials and they run within their zones. And a school board may have 5 or 7 in the state of Arkansas, and they're in each zone. Like Jonesboro Public Schools is broken up into 7 different zones, and you get a couple of different neighborhoods in each of those zones. And the only people that can vote are the ones in those zones, and they vote for a person. Now, around here, a lot of times there's no opposition, and so it's usually whoever's running gets it. So hopefully that'll change. We need more competitive school board running, because it's that important, but usually it's only about 100 to 200 votes, somewhere in between there, and that gets somebody elected, and that's fine and great. What that does is there's no real pressure to make sure that everybody's doing what they're supposed to be doing and doing their job. And when I say that, it's not like this is some glamorous job that you get a bunch of perks for. Being a school board member is probably the single greatest office you could run for that is service because you don't get paid, you don't get insurance, or you don't get any kind of payment, or you don't get any kind of perks. It just really is service. And so those that know people that are on the school board, just be aware that this is 100% service. But they do get elected. Now, their jobs are to pick a superintendent. If one is already there, it is to hire and fire a superintendent, and it is to help the district set goals and then hold the superintendent accountable based upon those goals set. So usually they should be performance goals. Sometimes that's not always the case. If you're not a very effective school board, you don't set performance goals. A lot of districts around here, the superintendent kind of runs the show, and what happens is they give the evaluation to the school board, and a lot of times it has nothing to do with performance of the student. But they are the boss of the boss. So they hire and fire the superintendent. They cannot hire and fire teachers. Now, they are involved with that process somewhat, and especially big positions, but that's the job of the superintendent and the principals within the schools to make sure that we're having the best teachers. And if they're not performing correctly, then they go in and hopefully raise that performance. And after a while, if that doesn't happen, then it's their responsibility to get rid of them. But the school board should be in tune enough to know when certain things are happening. They do have oversight, and they're supposed to know what's going on in the different schools and the dynamics within the different schools so that they're in tune and they can put pressure where pressure is needed for sure. Again, only on the superintendent. They set policy, so they write the rule book from dress code to discipline to how many snow days. Now, all of these guidelines have to fall within the guidelines of the state, and they got a pretty broad range to work within. But as long as they follow the guidelines of the state, which are some minimal guidelines, the school boards basically have a lot of flexibility there. Do discipline. Now, that doesn't mean that they do all discipline, but the major disciplines usually come into the school board and they discuss them. Most of the suspensions or the expulsions, especially, that comes through the school board. Now, that doesn't mean they have to hear every case, but they have to set whatever it is. If it's no weapons at school, they can say, no weapons at school, period, and this is the consequence if you bring a weapon to school. That's totally on the school board. But sometimes they'll actually have to listen to whatever it is that, if there's an expulsion for misconduct or an expulsion for drugs or something like that, and sometimes even weapons, that'll come through the school board just to have a hearing. That's due process. But there are some things that they said that it just is what it is. And the school does come in and make recommendations a lot, and the school board just will either sign off or try to make any changes. I don't know if school boards know that's what they're supposed to be doing, but that's what they're supposed to be doing. So like on dress code, the schools bring that to the school board and they ask, is this appropriate? Are you happy with this? Is this something that is good for you guys? And they say yes or no. They're in charge of the rule book. And the rule book 100% is law. If kids are getting in trouble, it better be in the rule book. And if it's not in the rule book, then they shouldn't be getting in trouble. If it is in the rule book and they're breaking it and they're not getting in trouble, that's a problem too. So the rule book is vitally important, and the school boards better know what's in the rule book. So they approve budgets. They control the purse strings. So some schools are different. I was on the school board once, and the budget was a book that was huge and thick and massive, and you had to go through it. And some do a good job of really identifying exactly how it comes through, and others flood you with information. But they are in charge of that. And so if something's going wrong within the budget, I mean, that falls on the school board. Obviously, the people that work each and every day, and they got accountants and things like that, they're putting this together. But the school board's supposed to go through this and check it and make sure that all the money is appropriately assigned. And so they're in charge of that. They're in charge of the way grant money is spent. state funds, how the tax money goes, the property taxes and things, teacher salaries, whether or not we buy buses, whether or not the football field gets a new turf, so forth and so on. That is all the job of the school boards. They set the policy for attendance, graduation requirements, and they even set the employee contracts. Didn't know if you knew that, but that is another job that they do. So they also are supposed to look at the big picture stuff. And I think that this is really important because some of that stuff that they do, I'll just be honest with you, that I just went through, the school brings that stuff to them and basically just gets a written approval. But this is the stuff that they should really be doing, the stuff that we're about to talk about. And as long as the school's meeting these benchmarks with the state, nobody ever really says anything to the schools. If they're reaching test scores or graduation rates, nobody says anything. And even that, to me, is wonky, because my wife loves that word, wonky. But it is wonky because as long as they're meeting some test scores, which if you listen to my first one, if 50% of your school is not reading proficiently, that's still an A or a B plus or something. The school board can set their own goals and set their own standards. If they want to go higher than what the state does, then they have the capability of doing that. And I will say this, if the scores tank or if the state comes in and takes over the school or if it gets sued, all that is on the school board. Usually they're the ones named in any lawsuits or any situations that come from the state or anything that goes on legally. They're usually always named in that suit along with the superintendent. They bear a huge burden. So if you're bearing that burden, you better be involved enough to make sure that whatever's going on within the school is happening at a level that should be happening. They should hold public meetings. Matter of fact, it's required by law that they have a monthly meeting where parents and people from the outside can come in and voice their concerns and hot topics and give the people the ability to weigh in on what's going on within the school. And that's super, super important. And the big one is that they should set the overall district's personality and culture. That's massive undertaking, depending on how big the school is, but it's the single most important thing that they do is set the tone, set the culture and the direction in which they want to see the district go. A lot of school boards will meet, they'll do a retreat, or they'll do some series of meetings within the summer to make sure that they're setting those goals and moving districts in the right direction. If they're not doing that, then shame on them. They should be, and they need to reevaluate what they're doing as a school board if they're not trying to set the tone. Because if the school board doesn't set the tone, who sets the tone? The teachers or the kids? Usually it's the kids, because the teachers want to teach, and that's their job. My gosh, we throw so much at teachers, and we just bombard them with changing stuff on them all the time and new things from the state and new things from the district, and it's not their job to set the culture. Now, they set the tone within their own classroom for sure, and hopefully they're doing a good job of that. But as far as the whole district goes, that's up to the school board. And then the superintendent is supposed to take that to the district, and they're supposed to do what the school board wants them to do. And so setting the culture and the tone is the single most important thing, in my opinion, that the school board does. And then that way that you drive, whether it's learning, whether it's extracurricular activity, which is big. Studies show that if you're in band and if you're in sports and other things, that's huge for the kids in their learning process, getting them involved in how we look and act when we're at these things in these places, and when we're at games, how the students should perform and act, and are you wanting to be in an environment of learning and set the standards there and what that looks like. Walking down the halls, how do you do that? The overall culture of what it is that the schools should do, that is up to the school board. And, being on a school board, you're either an unsung hero or you're the villain. And unsung heroes get no pat on the back or any of that stuff. But the villains, they get a ton of stuff. They get beat up. There's all kinds of things that go on with being the villain, obviously. And I've been self-employed for a long time, and people are like, oh, that's going to be the great thing. I said, yeah, you can make 200-300 people happy, and then you upset one, and really then the one person will tell as many people as they can how bad you do. And so that's the same situation with school board. All the good things that could be going on, you're never going to get the pat on the back. If one thing bad happens, oh, that school board is horrible. And so it's a difficult job. It takes a lot of time and effort if you're doing it right. And I'll just be honest with you. Some do it right in Northeast Arkansas, in Craighead. Some do it wrong. Some have harder jobs to do, and some are a little bit easier. But the fact is that this is something that Jonesboro, Craighead County, Northeast Arkansas needs to get more involved in. Whether you've got kids in the districts or not, you need to be pushing your school boards to make sure that the schools are moving in the right direction. If something's going wrong with the school and it's heading in the wrong direction, people should be in an uproar. You heard me say this in the last couple of podcasts, that if the schools aren't moving in the right direction, the city follows the schools. Beds of prisons are predicted by how many students are reading proficiently. So if you have a really low proficiency in reading, they'll come in and say you need a high count of beds in your jails. And that's just the way that it is, and it makes a lot of sense. But that's a nutshell what school board members are supposed to be doing. It's a tough job, again, like I said, but it's an important job. In my opinion, it's one of the most important jobs that we have, because I'm a firm believer that the way that schools go is the way that your town's going to go. And that's been proven throughout every city that I know of in the United States. I want to say, look at Memphis. Memphis was once an unbelievable, booming, thriving town with culture. And it's, don't get me wrong, still has a lot of that culture and stuff, but everything was moving in the right direction. And then the schools started to fail. Corruption entered in, and lots of stuff just happened, and nobody took charge of that. And now, where is Memphis going? What direction is Memphis going? Now, they may be able to take places and protect them somewhat, but the truth is that if your schools are failing, the town around all of those schools are going to fail. It's just the way it is. It's impossible for that not to take place, because if you let the kids set the culture, then look around the United States and see what happens. Memphis is dying in a lot of ways, and if you look at the schools and when the schools started and give some correlation and some time, you'll find out the fall of the city was not far behind. And, that's happening in a lot of different cities in the United States. And again, they do not recover. And so I hope this helps. I hope that this gives some information. I hope that this makes people aware of what's going on, and maybe even some people that are school board members, they listening to this, they'll be like, dang, I didn't know that I was responsible for that. A lot of people takes 2 or 3 years to even get their feet wet when they get on the school board. And around here, it's a 5-year term. So when you get elected, you're there for 5 years, and the learning curve's huge. I've got a couple friends of mine that are still on boards, and they're still learning. The state does a pretty poor job of training, especially getting them up to speed really fast. And I think the state needs to do a much, much better job of that. That's a whole nother podcast, but I will hit just a little bit. Their training is okay at best, and they really need to step it up. That's one of the big reasons why we are where we're at within the United States as far as our education goes, is because we're not training school boards to be highly effective school boards. I'm working with some people on that too. Hopefully here in this year, we have the workings of training to make sure that we could come in and we could train school boards and make them highly effective right off the bat. And if they're new, we can come in and do some fresh ups with the school boards, or we can do some individual stuff. And we're putting some packets together, and and some manuals. And so that'll be able to really talk about the nuts and bolts and get people to come in and really be effective immediately. Now, my recommendation to anybody that comes in that's on the school board is take a couple of meetings, listen before you speak, and really learn the dynamics of what's going on, and then start to give your opinions on those things. And make sure that, here's the key, school boards and people that know people on the school boards and the people around town that can see the schools that need to be doing better. But if school boards and districts work for the kids, for the betterment of the kids, you should be doing a good job within the school district. So that's the number one thing that all school boards need to know and need to understand is your job is to make sure kids learn. So they should be first and foremost. Every decision made should be about the kid. Every decision made should be about the kid. Discipline should be about the kid. Standards should be about the kids. Learning standards should be about the kids. Dress codes should be about the kids. Everything in that handbook should be about creating an atmosphere for people to learn. Discipline should be about the kid and the kids being able to learn. I'm a big proponent in it. If you come to school not to learn, you don't need to be there. That's just the way that it is, especially these days. So you got to be able to get rid of the ones that are just there to cause problems and havoc, and that's in every school. You got kids that could care less about learning. They're just there to, I don't even know what. But you heard me talk about parental involvement and all that good stuff. It's still the number one problem within all of our districts is not enough parental involvement. So appreciate you listening in. Again, we got wonderful ways to support the channel, and we'll keep flooding and putting stuff out on the airways so that we can help move this town in a direction that the people want. And please listen, please share. And if you feel like you want to support the channel, please go to our website, and that's the Pulse of Jonesboro. And there's ways to help us stay in this great and wonderful area that we're in and really help Jonesboro move in the right direction. We are putting together ways that you can communicate with us and tell us your topics. We are on Facebook, so Facebook away. Throw stuff in the comments. We don't hold back anything, and we'd love to know the good and the bad about what we're doing, and put topics in there. Maybe you see something that you want us to do and want us to talk about, want us to find out. We are great researchers. We really know how to go and find facts, and we'll put them out there on the airways. This is about holding our elected officials accountable. This is about taking control of our city and our county, and hopefully Northeast Arkansas, and really having an effect and giving you guys the voice to make sure that everybody understands who's in charge, and that's you. Have a great week.